test.
Can be good. Like to have a local McLendon-Chisholm, like, High Point or Blackland. So see how that goes. He stood me up last week. He can't go out and play with Carol. So he's got to come to the house tomorrow night. We'll see how that goes. I've got to have duty in my house. Me, my dogs, and the dog.
Right at 6:30, so as you look, get ready to get started. Would ask that you take a look at the minutes from the last meeting and make sure that we're ready to go and ask about it. Good evening. It's now 6:31. I would like to open up tonight's meeting of the McLendon-Chisholm City Economic Development Committee meeting. Call to order. Next one will be an invocation and then a pledge of allegiance. I'll go ahead and do the invocation. Let's pray. Well, Heavenly Father, we come before you tonight, Lord. We just lift you up and thank you for this opportunity to serve our fellow citizens, Lord. Just ask you to watch over our thoughts, our minds. Help us to make good decisions that bring credit upon the city and help us to prosper and do the things that are necessary to make us a place that people want to come to. Lord, we just ask you to watch over our thoughts and help us to be the best citizens we can. We ask all these blessings in Jesus' name. Amen.
Sure. Please join me in the pledge. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The Texas flag. I honor the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state, under God, one and indivisible.
Thank you, Mark. I guess we still have one oath of office that needs to be established in there. You said to the alternates to get sworn in as well.
Do solemnly swear that I will not directly or indirectly obtain, offer, promise,
completed with item number 3. We're going to move on to item number 4, citizens' comments. The floor is now open if anybody wants to make any comments. Okay, it looks like we don't have any citizens wanting to make any public comments. So we'll move on to item number 5, which is the approval of minutes from the previous meeting on September 14th. Has everybody had a chance to review the minutes from September 14th? Does anybody have any questions, concerns with what, as they were published tonight? No questions, no concerns, so we'll accept them as published. Lisa, and I'll sign them. Anything else you need from me on that?
Is there a motion, or, I'm sorry,
We're on item number 5, the approval of the minutes from September 14th. There's no questions, concerns, no comments about them, so I'll sign them as they're written.
okay.
So moving on to item, yes, sir.
Point of order, there needs to be a motion, a second,
Incorrect, sorry about that.
I make a motion, we accept the minutes as published.
I second that motion.
We have a motion, and it's been seconded, so we accept the minutes as published.
As long as no one objects, we're good.
Discussion and then votes.
Oh, all right, is there any discussion? No discussion? All right, all who are accepted, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. No nays, it's been accepted. Keep me in line, please. All right, we're gonna move on to item number 6. Prior to going into number 6 real quick, I wanted to say thank you. I wanted to address the members of the committee here, and thank you for willingness to be participants in this process, because this is definitely going to be something that the city needs to take a serious look at, our economic development, where we're planning to go in the future. And so I appreciate you taking time out of your individual personal time to come in here and, work on behalf of the city and behalf of the citizens of McLendon-Chisholm. So thank you very much. I'd also like to thank Lisa and her staff. I know this is another added-on evening time that you're taking away from your families, so I do appreciate your time as well. And also the councilman, Mr. Dahl, I appreciate you coming in, and I appreciate your help keeping me online, because it's been a while since I've been on the council, so please help me stay in order. All right, and then the last thing I want to do is, for any of the citizens out there, we definitely are open to taking in input from the citizens of McLendon-Chisholm. We want to hear what they have to say. We want their input as we move forward on this economic council. We're just in the beginning phases of it, and we definitely want to hear from the citizens what their expectations are and what they want to see as far as the city goes. So please, if you have any input, get in contact with any one of us on the council here, or on the committee, and we'll love to hear your inputs, and we'll share them amongst ourselves at the next committee meeting. At this time, does anybody else have any comments they'd like to make before we get into the actual number 6? Item number 6. Okay. Moving on to item number 6, items for consideration. Item 6.1, discussion with the city planner regarding the significance of Code of Ordinances, including the zoning ordinances and the comprehensive plan as related to the economic development efforts.
Okay. This is not the city planner. Mike Cooker was planned to be here tonight, but he actually represents several small cities as a planner, and he had a P&Z meeting that he didn't think he was going to have, but he had tonight. So he apologizes. He did leave you some materials to review, and we can kind of go over those towards the end of the meeting if you like. I did get another speaker for this evening. This is John Godwin. And John is, he's held several positions as city manager around the Metroplex, most recently Paris, Texas, and he's currently working as a project manager or a management management
I'm a contract employee.
for the city of Terrell. And he's helped us work on this memorandum of understanding for water. So when we get to the infrastructure discussion, I thought it would be helpful to kind of hear the Terrell perspective of that. So I've invited him here. So for this one, I know that last time you talked about looking at those critical documents for economic development. And I kind of divided them up into Code of Ordinances and pulled out the ones that I thought were the most important for economic development, that being the business regulations, the zoning regulations for residential and commercial, and the subdivision regulations. I know you all reviewed them on your own, but if you had any specific concerns, if you want to let me know here in just a minute. The other governing documents, I think we talked about them last time, but we may have left one off, but local government code has economic development. It's kind of the basis for economic development policies in there for local governments. What? Oh, the blinking. Yeah, I'm sorry about the blinking. We're working on it. The comprehensive plan, which you have a copy of, the economic development plan, which you've been tasked with creating, and then economic development policies, which we have one of, and then we have several agreements, economic development agreements. So those are kind of the basis for those critical documents. So we had that down as a discussion tonight. Mike Coker was going to go over the comprehensive plan and kind of, what the zoning ordinance was and is about, and P&Z's function, and then go over the comprehensive plan. So you have those printed documents, but if you want to discuss it, it is on the agenda and you're free to do that. And I'm not much of a presenter of that information, but I'm happy to try to answer any of your questions if you have it, or if you want to move forward so we can get to John, we can hold it to the end. And I'll leave it to you, Chairman.
So John, what's your last name?
Godwin.
Godwin.
Correct.
Really would wish that Mr. Coker was here tonight. John, I'm glad you're here, though.
He will be available most of the time. Some of these small communities don't always, they're like us, they don't always have a P&Z meeting scheduled, but when they do, he does have to attend. So he did apologize, and he will definitely try to make the next one,
No, I
or
understand.
whenever you request him.
Most definitely. A couple things, I want to make sure that I had this correct. That, basically, we've got to make changes to our comprehensive plan before we can ever make any changes to the zoning, planning and zoning. Is that correct?
That is correct. So state law requires that your zoning is compatible with your, or is in compliance with your comprehensive plan. So whenever we have a change of zoning, if that zoning doesn't fit the comprehensive plan, we actually change the comprehensive plan first, or if there's a request in front of it. So this last meeting for P&Z and what will be on the council agenda, there was actually a request for a change from agricultural to a commercial zoning. And it wasn't shown that way on the comp plan, so there was actually the item right in front of it was a comp plan change. So that comp plan change had to show that area instead of rural residential, it had to change to commercial. So the comp plan is not zoning, it is more of a general look of things. So instead of calling it general business, we just refer to it as commercial, so for that area. And then other areas, we may have it as residential or rural residential, we may not hone down on like single family and be as specific as our zoning ordinance. But it does need to be, our zoning ordinance does need to be in compliance or generally compatible with that comprehensive plan. And Mike's really good at explaining that much better than I am.
Yeah, I really had wanted to discuss the current zoning that we have as it is. We have many different zone capabilities.
I can try to help you with that if you'd like. Did you want me to talk about the different zoning districts?
It's pretty self-explanatory. Does anybody have any questions on the zoning, the way that it's broken out?
I actually had a question about the comprehensive plan. So what's the status now for rewriting the comprehensive plan? Where are we in that process?
I think we need council to make a decision on if it's going to be a total rewrite or if it's going to be a partial. And I think this board probably needs to weigh in a little bit on what they think about that, and I think P&Z also needs to do that. So I guess we can have some input from each of those boards.
So what I'm hearing is there is no formal plan right now to rewrite.
It's been budgeted, but there is no plan as to
Right.
how to go about it.
And so that's absent that. it ends up being zoning. So the zoning, any zoning changes will only be judged relative to that existing
To the
comprehensive
existing
plan.
plan.
Or planning and zoning's willingness to make changes to the plan to adapt it to accommodate a zoning request.
That is correct. And as an example, I'll kind of show you what they did this last time. They would go before council, and council has the final say on zoning, so the PZ make recommendations to council, and the council will vote whether or not they want to accept it or not. So this piece of property here is 2 acres in front of us. That was requested to add to commercial, and this where I sit here is demolitions. So the 2 items on the agenda for that day were the comp plan for that church, that to say no residential or commercial, and what we're willing to go to from that to the business. So we recommend
And how much frontage do they request?
how much frontage.
On, I mean, on that parcel, how deep? I guess that was, I'm sorry.
I have to go back and look at the property. I know it's 2 acres total and it's fairly square, so I can tell you deep. And it's just in the, for the middle. Yes, Washington is the chair.
Right, right. Yeah, I understand. Yeah, I understand the policy constraint that you, that, yeah, because the discussion the prior discussions we've had focused around, how do we focus economic development specifically to 205? Is it, broad length, a central shopping area, or some variation between, right? I mean, and we haven't reached consensus, but part of that, we had hoped to accomplish that consensus as part of the rewrite of the comprehensive plan.
And then to have that reflected
So it'd be
in the
consistent, right? So it's good. I mean, it's a good discussion that we're having that before this is really started. Yeah. Well, if we have, and I don't know the specifics, I mean, it's probably a question for the attorney, but if there was, I'm going to use a word, I don't know if it's the correct word, but if you put a moratorium in place for any zoning changes for a period of time consistent to achieve rewriting the plan, or at least to get the framework in place, that would make sense, and that would provide, right,
That was a
all
question that
all
I-
aspects, right?
That was a question I wanted to ask Mr. Coker, was
Yeah.
is-
He didn't say no, but he said that he really didn't have to do some very extreme circumstances. If that's just law or law.
Right, right.
The attorney was not really, so I don't know if he's gonna.
I haven't heard of zoning moratoriums. I've heard of building moratoriums. I'm not familiar with the zoning.
That's why I was saying I was using that term, not because it's the correct term, but because it's a term we can all relate to. There's probably a better term that would be utilized.
I can ask the attorney that question.
Yeah, the point, I think we're all in agreement, or
I think
the
John
sense,
might.
the sense of the committee is we would want to slow down rezoning so that we don't get backed into a corner where zoning decisions have been made that would then restrict future development, the plan for future development.
More adversely impact.
Exactly.
I was just gonna say, I'm not an attorney, you need to talk to him, but, or her, him. But I don't think you can slow down, zoning requests, because typically zoning requests, it's a right that you have to request, and you must respond positively or negatively within a reasonable period of
Right,
time.
right.
And so for you to just go slow or say, wait till we get this done. So your solution is to do it as quickly as you can, obviously. Now, another solution, Lisa had mentioned this, is you can always amend your comp plan, even at the same meeting, you amend your zoning. If you want to do that, then you can do boom, boom if you want to. So that's always an option too. It's a little more trouble,
Yeah.
but in the meantime, that's probably your best, safest, most legal solution is to do both at the same time. Or you have to do one before the other one, but you can do the same meeting.
It's just hard because we don't have the big overall picture of what we're looking for. You know, we're just having to take it a little piecemeal at a time, and that's difficult because we don't know what that big picture looks like. It was kind of thrown out in the meeting that at P&Z that maybe we should consider a joint meeting, maybe this group and P&Z, to see how we want to approach that comp plan. So ultimately, P&Z needs to kind of get their arms around it, but this group needs to touch it too, especially as it relates to commercial developments. So if you want to, if Ms. Walshes thinks that's a good idea, and this group thinks it's a good idea, Chairman, then, you know, we could maybe try to plan something at the next P&Z meeting where you all attended, or I don't know if we want to call it a workshop, but maybe a portion of that meeting, maybe right at the very beginning or right at the end, whatever you're comfortable with, and maybe have that discussion so everyone can participate.
I guess I was under the impression that we were going to do that tonight, that we were going to talk to Mr. Coker and we were going to talk about the P&Z.
Well, I think his intention was to go over some possibilities of what might work.
So I think, Mr. Chairman, I think a joint workshop or working group would be beneficial, because that way we can solicit more citizen input, one. Two would be since we're not going to reach policy discussion or policy decisions, we're able to coalesce around it, and then that would be a chance for Councilman Vidal to bring back any thoughts from council specifically about how they wanted to move forward. Because we have to have all three working together.
Does that sound right?
Yes, ma'am.
Moratorium on the zoning, do we not have an extenuating circumstance with the construction going on into apply perhaps?
I think the question was just, we're not sure if we can legally do a zoning moratorium. I think building moratorium,
Right.
we
I
might be
understand
able to for commercial,
Right.
but.
But we have extenuating circumstance with the construction happening on into apply that may allow us to
Well, that's
do
one of the
a
things.
moratorium on zoning perhaps?
Yeah, that's one thing I did want to bring up. I actually went online and I pulled down the latest roads consortium documents that are out there. And if you look at the current ready-to-let date is listed as May 2020, but the actual let date is planned for September of 2025. So it becomes increasingly difficult to justify not
Oh,
allowing
okay.
businesses to.
Is that starting then, 2025?
That's based on.
What they're
latest-
saying now?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, all right.
Based on that, that's 5 years from now, so if they're not starting, they're not ready to let the contract to start the southern part of 205 construction for 5 years, that makes it increasingly hard for us to justify anything by saying, okay, they're going to be tearing up 205, so.
Right, well, it opens things up for us too in other ways, I suppose, so.
Mr. Chairman, just a quick comment. It seems to me like there's an issue of first principles as to what the goal of the economic development committee is going to be with respect to planning and zoning in this question. So as I'm looking through here, and I think you and I are both almost on the same page, I'm on page 5-1, which is a list. It's a list under future land uses, which includes goals and policies under the comp plan as they exist currently. I've had the chance to review them already. It seems like some of these might need to be updated based upon public comment before we start engaging ourselves in negotiations with planning and zoning on our current mission? It seems to me more of a first principles type question up front. Do we want to go with these current land use things that we have on the comp plan? Do we want to recommend recommendations and then go to planning and zoning? Or do we want to just jump into planning and zoning and see how we can implement the plan?
Well, I like the idea that we might actually be able to amend the comp plan quickly, because I would like to draw this out and then have somebody come in and ask for a change for zoning and put some property in a place that is detrimental to the city's plan in the future. So if we can amend it as quickly as possible, maybe that's something that we should look at. I think that any of these like major changes are gonna have to go through a committee to get them accomplished.
Yeah, that's my feeling as well. So perhaps, I know we kind of mentioned it before, possibly a public survey or something like this, some way of getting public input, either through the website or whatever.
Well, I think that having that, the joint, having a joint session with the Economic Development Committee and then also the planning and
I've got
zoning,
it.
and then inviting the public to come in and have a time to hear their voices on it.
Oh, okay, so public, people to show up and actually.
Right. I mean, it's a lot, so, and I'm going to state it this way. I understand under Texas code, planning and zoning owns the comprehensive plan. They're responsible for it. So we're providing input to planning and zoning as they are deliberating. That would be, in my mind, the need for the joint meeting, right? So we have a understanding of viewpoints. In that process, then, as whatever planning and zoning is decided, whether it's going to be a full rewrite or a partial rewrite or just a revision of selected parts of it, then I presume there's a public hearing process that goes on throughout that process, throughout that. And
I think you're, I think you're correct in that the way it was implied in Mr. Coker, whether or not you know this is right, is that it is planning and zoning's responsibility to guide the rewrite or the complete rewrite or
Last one, I'm so
amendment or
sorry.
whatever. Now,
But I can speak to it as well.
everything we do goes up to city council.
Right.
Ultimately, it'll be city council's approval. We don't have the final say in it. But we did talk that there will have to be public meetings. We obviously can't do this.
Oh, there it is. There it is.
Nobody on planning really wants to, who knows if you go 5 months to, want to do that. But yeah, I mean, I think, but yes, I think the short of it is yes. I think the way Mr. Coker led me to believe is that it is ultimately our responsibility to own this. And so we turned it over to the council to ultimately approve what we did. So obviously we want to do it good.
Yeah.
And
And it scares me to say this, but I think since I was in the city at the time this last document was produced, I was actually at the council meetings when we went through the initial review of it. Council made a few changes, right? They went through some of them from public comment, and those, that produced the document that exists today. So that process works.
I guess the question before us is, do we want to have a public hearing and a joint meeting together to then allow us to come to some discussions and then potentially come to a decision point that we could provide input into the council to make decisions on the way forward?
I guess the way I was thinking of it, Commissioner, was that we would have a joint workshop, and of course, anytime we have a meeting, it's open to the public. But I wouldn't advertise that as, I wouldn't advertise that as a public hearing. I would advertise it as our workshop, and then I think as we start to develop some recommendations, we would then have a formal public hearing, probably that we would make more of an open house or something.
Yes, definitely, as you go through I didn't mean to interrupt you, as we decide whether we're going to do a complete redo or just a partial, there would definitely be a public input process. And what that is, I can't tell you. I don't know if it would just be public hearings, but I would think that we would actually have several opportunities for the public to come in and talk about what they want their town to look like and what features they'd like to have. It probably is a little bit premature just at this point, I would think. I think what Ms. Swalshy was saying is just this initial meeting would just to kind of for you all to touch base with P&Z and kind of decide who's going to touch what parts of that comp plan. And I think Councilmember Dahl wanted to kind of relay that message, and I think maybe we need to go ahead and do that now because it's going to fit into the conversation about the directives from council. So I had it at the end of the agenda, but if you don't mind, Chairman, if we'll kind of bump it up because I think it relates to this.
No, that's suggested, so we were going to switch towards the 6 point. You got 6.3? All right, so we're moving, at the time, we're going to table item 6.1, and we're going to move to item 6.3 to get some input from the City Council liaison to the Economic Development Committee.
Yeah, Mr. Chair. So at our city council meeting, I discussed your question with the council, and one of the consensus agreements that we came up to is that zoning and the comprehensive plan are the primary means of focus at the moment. Just as an example, our current commercial zoning right now is going to be consumed almost completely by the 205 expansion. So one of the things, if you guys wanted to focus on, was maybe slightly expanding that out of the right-of-way to the current size. It's an idea, just as a curiosity. That way, if someone wanted to come into our current zoning locations, that they would have the ability under an amended zoning and under the amended comprehensive plan, they'd have the ability to still utilize that strip until you guys come up with a more permanent solution. Like I said, that's just an idea and input. But one of the things that the council wanted to focus on was the comprehensive plan, mainly as an all-inclusive thing. But when it comes to economic development, how you guys want to be able to situate things, how you guys want to, if you look at the current commercial zoning and also look at forecasted commercial zoning, as far as zoning that would change in the future, how you guys want to develop that as well.
So basically, our focus is, our focus for this would be to do what we were expecting to do tonight, which is to focus on the comprehensive development plan, inputs to that would then input into the changes to the zoning, planning and zoning that would make them permanent for the city. So
Yes, it's just set up recommendations to P&Z, in which case would go after P&Z's recommendation would go to council, and council would vote it.
And I think probably your determination about where you want retail, where you see retail being beneficial for the city, might come out of developing your economic development plan, which is the other part of what council wanted to task you with. So, and that might actually be beneficial at that point to go ahead and divide into your, just a suggestion, your subcategories, so that you can start having those conversations about planning and zoning versus business, retention, development, bringing business here. At that point, I think you're probably going to have some conversation before you get into the meat of with P&Z as to where you think that retail zoning might want to be. But I think that initial joint meeting would be beneficial just for everybody to kind of touch base. So if you want to see if the next P&Z meeting for November, it looks like it's the 19th, which is a Thursday. I don't know how you feel about Thursdays. I think it's going to be easier for you to join them because we generally advertise, for zoning changes and plat, kind of the same third Thursday, isn't it? The third Thursday of the month for those. So if you could join them, it'd probably be a lot easier for anybody that's applying, because we'll still have to take care of regular business on that night as well, unless you think something different.
I said take it to a vote. Looking members of the committee, is everybody available to attend a meeting, a co-meeting with the P&Z on the November 19th, Thursday, November 19th? Well, you'll do that one.
Can we discuss before we set?
Yes, sir.
So our next meeting would be the 16th, on Monday, the 16th, by prior agreement. So the same week, we would meet on Monday.
We could forego that and then just move our meeting to the.
Could, that would be an option, yeah, certainly. The alternative is to set a special meeting, a workshop, special workshop up with P and Z separately. That way we don't intrude on normal P and Z business. They can focus on their activities, because this is going to have more of a planning discussion, or a planning meeting discussion, a work group discussion than actual.
I guess the question on that would be, how busy is a P and Z meeting? Could we not accomplish that at the same time?
That,
Well, I mean, it depends on whether or not we get any class. I mean, I have to kind of get careful. And last night we had, last week we had 2 items. I mean, maybe still most of the time talking about this. So I mean, it really, it can just hit or miss. Right now we've got.
I don't have anything currently, and it's they really need to apply almost a month in advance so that we have time to review things. So there may not be anything, applications on for this time.
So perhaps a better compromise to Mr. Kippen's question is, instead of us attending their meeting, maybe they should attend ours.
Why? I'm just trying to, in all fairness, trying to cut down on the number of meetings too, right?
That's what I was trying to.
I understand, they're worried about the disruption of public.
Well, it's more, I'm just asking why I don't have I can, certainly the 19th is fine for me, I mean, we can go to that.
I kind of favor attending that one on the 19th before go ours, but the 3 days prior to.
Discussion is, anybody have any other points on that?
I think if we got a meeting with that or something that we thought was going to be good, we don't know if there's so we next time we can do that. But I think that's essentially that.
Yeah, that's my concern, and I
think that's, my fear is if we wait much longer, we're going to do it in November, it's going to be in there.
Well, that's my concern, and then I didn't want to add another workshop as something additional, because that brings in the members from the city to have to come in and support that as well, so it would actually probably be better off if we could consolidate.
Mr. Chair, if you wanted to have your EC meeting prior to the normally scheduled P&Z board meeting, you could do everything in one day. So if you guys wanted to meet on your own prior to the P&Z meeting, you could still do that as well. Earlier.
I think the focus on what we need to get done has to work with P&Z, so until we do that, we're not going to get everything.
I agree with Mr. Childers. We're at the point that we're not really accomplishing much until we have this code meeting together.
Well, there is that economic development plan as well, and there are other components of it that you may wish to discuss. It's up to you as how you approach it, but the resolution that created the committee didn't exactly do an outline, but they outlined what would be in that plan. So you may want to start tackling some of those items, the mission and the purpose of the plan, start looking at examples of how you want to put it together. Certainly the retail zoning is a critical component of that, but there are other aspects. But however you want to do it, if you want to do that first, it's certainly understandable.
Well, that was kind of the charge that I thought we had during the last committee meeting. The charge was to look at how we were going to make the changes to the comprehensive plan and to the zoning. And so I take that as that should be our primary focus, because we get anything else that we come up with our economic plan hinges on making the changes to that economic, or to the comprehensive plan and to the zoning. Am I not correct on that?
Yeah, you're correct.
So I think that what we do is we focus on getting the comprehensive plan inputs and the zoning and planning and zoning inputs into the city council so they can make a decision. Once we've done that, then I think we can break into those separate committees, then we can tackle those things. But until we've made the changes, I don't think there's much that we can do, because we come with a great plan, but if we don't have that set in motion in our comprehensive plan and planning and zoning, I don't think we can implement it.
All right, so did we leave off with you all having,
We'll have to take a vote on the 19th.
on the day?
Yeah, so, what we'd like to do is we won't just totally cancel the next, Economic Development Council meeting on the 16th. We'll just put it as a potential, if something major comes up, if nothing major comes up for planning and zoning, then we will cancel our meeting and we'll have a combined meeting for the 19th. And what I'd like to do is to take a vote, and everybody, in accordance with that, we won't cancel our 16th meeting, we'll keep it as a potential in case something happens. But then the likelihood is that we'll have a joint meeting November 19th, Thursday at 6:30. Take a vote, all. I mean, two separate motions, one that basically table our.
So there already is kind of an implicit meeting that happened. That we cancel or it's just as it just has a zero day. So I move that we meet on November 19th with planning and zoning for a joint meeting, and that's it.
Hey, is it important to say working group versus meeting? Just
Workshop.
workshop?
Yeah,
Yeah,
workshop.
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 Mr.
So
Coker
amended.
will be available on Thursday, so that's a good day.
And it's a workshop specifically, we have this in the meeting notes, that it's a workshop specifically to discuss the comprehensive building plan and potential updates to the planning and zoning that will be passed up to the city council. Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say nay.
Another point of order, Mr. Chairman, we need a second. Oh, she's second. My apologies. My apologies.
So, anyone opposed? No opposed, so that motion moves forward for us to have a combined working group on November 19th with the Planning and Zoning Commission to discuss the comprehensive building plan and potential updates to the planning and zoning that should be passed up to the city council. There's no other questions about item number 6.3. We'll return to item 6.1, and we can dive into this, and if anybody has any questions about the planning and zoning regulations, I did have a couple myself. I'd like to let everybody else who's got questions go first. No, I'll follow that.
Just go around, I guess, poll. I've got one or two.
What do you want to talk about? Recognizes,
So the relative, well, let me make sure I get this. So the question I have for city council, or for city staff, is what specifically are perceived by staff as shortfalls within the existing code that need to be addressed?
The comp plan or the Code of Ordinances?
We'll go with Code of Ordinances.
We started about 2.5 years ago, subdivision updates, zoning updates. We actually have all the notes from those, but we actually never implemented them. And part of the reason for that is council changed over, P&Z changed over, we just had a lot of changes. So I think that needs to take place, whether or not, but now it's been so long, and I think since we have new people, those need to be reviewed again. So I think those zoning updates need to change. Some of them were process procedures, things just to make them compatible with state law, because state law there had been some changes, procedural changes. And then part of it may be that, we just want to look at some, I can't remember what they all are, but there was a kind of a lengthy list there. Things that were confusing in our ordinance that needed to be cleared up.
And we received those inputs from a vendor, as I recall. Is that correct?
Yes, Franklin Legal is the one who codifies our ordinance, and Kirk Franklin is a Texas attorney, and he just, he does ordinances, he organizes them for various cities, and he doesn't necessarily write them. He can, but we paid him to look at state law and to look at our ordinances and to tell us what was not right. to kind of tell us that, you know, this one is way out of date, or you need to update for whatever reason. So we have all of his notes, and then we went through that and we made changes according to that. And then we had Mike Coker and Doug DeFreight, our engineer, kind of go through the subdivision and zoning and further make suggestions. And then we had our building official put some input in, things that get confusing when people come in for building permits, questions that come up frequently about accessory structures, things that don't make sense to staff when we look at applications. So those are things that we kind of have all written and ready to go, but they do need to be reviewed by planning and zoning, and they need to go through that public hearing process. So that's one of them. Business regulations is another one that probably needs
Well,
to be
let's,
reviewed.
before we go to business regulations, let's talk about, so, Mr. Chairman, what I think we should do is have this, since they've, document review has started, and there's already a list of inputs, have the city planner review those as a formal task, come back, because he can report back to us, also to planning and zoning, with if it's sufficient or needs modification. And that way, you know, we know how to proceed forward with that,
Just for the zoning?
just for that zoning, right? Because
So do we have that
we need to
authority?
do the same task for business, but I wanted to make sure we address
Yes,
those.
we have all
separately.
those notes previously.
Yeah.
So the question is, do we have that authority, or do we put it as an ask to the city council and ask them to have the, because I don't think we
Yeah,
can.
that would be a recommendation, because that
Okay.
that resource is out of scope of what this committee has
Okay.
control
We
over.
can't exercise any oversight over any of the funding of the city. We can task them to spend money on our behalf. So we'll make it as a recommendation.
we can add that.
So we have a motion to provide a recommendation to the city council to have the city planner to review the proposed changes to the Code of Ordinances. So that's the motion before the people. Do you have anybody want to discuss it real quickly before we move forward with a vote?
Well, it's the city,
Just Mike Coker's time, just Mike Coker's time.
there's already been an investment made by the city to have a review done by these codes.
Yes, in 2018, we
Yeah.
did them. I don't
So,
think,
so that's already been reviewed. Then they were reviewed further by the city planner and city attorney. Did the city attorney
city-
look at them?
yes, our city attorney, well, David Pascal did it when he was here.
Right. So it's been reviewed, so it has a body of work. What I'm just trying to do is understand, is that body of work that's been done sufficient and current? And if it is, then it could be moved forward, and that would be the recommendation to council. If not, then bring it to make it current. Because right now, our code has some gaps in it relative to state law.
Exactly, because that was one of the questions I had, was about where we are in relation to some of the changes. Does our zoning, are they in compliance with the current laws that have been passed and changed? Like one of ours was that you had to have 80/20 material. I don't think we can enforce that anymore, can we?
We cannot. However, that may change again. And so one of the discussions we had was leaving it alone. And there's a little clause in there that says, if it's out of compliance with state law, you just can't do it. So that was one thought, so we didn't have to change it back. And there are different schools of thought on whether that's going to change or not. So many cities are upset with that. It just depends on how much pressure those legislators get as to whether that may reverse or not. I thought for sure it would, but I'm hearing them kind of stand firm on that, so who knows? I don't know. But you can certainly decide if you want to take it out. We can always put it back in again.
No, my question wasn't necessarily about that specific one. Were any of the other things that are currently in our zoning regulations, are they not within the guidelines of the Texas state codes? I just want to make sure that we understand what the codes are actually saying in comparison to what we have written.
Right. We can provide you that. I can't rattle them off the top of my head, but we can certainly provide you that, and we can, if council is agreeable, we can go over it at that workshop.
Well, isn't that what the work maybe I'm missing, chapter 14 zoning, right? That was reviewed by the vendor and then members of staff.
Yes,
And those changes have not been implemented.
that's correct.
So what we're asking is just go look at those changes, because those changes brought it consistent with state guidelines and state code
That was in 2018.
in 2018. Now, there may be, so in that review, they would identify if there were anything that was insufficient.
We want to have our current attorney probably take a look.
Yeah, exactly.
Mike Coker is probably all over the codes and
My-
want to have
'cause-
another look.
Because my worry, of course, is that we ask planning and zoning to rewrite the comprehensive plan. It has to be, there has to be consistency as we move through these various documents to include our ordinances and make sure everything lines up.
Yeah, does that review because planning and zoning reviewed those ordinances as well? Was
Yes,
that
we
in
we
that
held public
timeframe
hearings and the whole bit, and you recommended approval
of the ordinances?
of the changes.
To the ordinances? Okay, because I remember, and it might have been 2018, I don't know, that was
It's been a
a
while.
while ago. So I didn't know if those were included in those markups that you have as well, too, because I remember going through the ordinances. And they were more from like what you're talking about, things that we felt like didn't, because we reviewed the comprehensive plan a couple of years ago as well. And it was a lot of looking at the ordinances in the comprehensive plan and what doesn't line up and trying to identify some of those things. So some of the planning and zoning comments may be in what we find in what's sitting out there untouched as well.
Yes. We can organize out all that and bring it to the workshop after we talk to council. I'm sure council will, I feel like council will be in favor of having those
Yeah.
reviewed again and moving forward. I can't speak for them, but I would think so.
I think that's where our motion is at the moment right now, is about a request to them to do that.
Mr. Chairman, can we repeat the motion?
The motion before the committee right now is to take a look, to have Mr. Coker, the city planner, to take a look at the current Code of Ordinances that were reviewed, the updates that were received. Would you, Mr. Coker, correct, to look at those and make sure that they're in compliance with the current state law and the state regulations?
I'd like to second.
Who first?
Yeah,
Okay.
that's good, I'm good with it. I mean, we're going to the same place.
We have a motion from Mr. Kippen and a second by Mr. David. And so, there was no other discussion, any other discussion on this? No further discussion, we'll take a vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. No opposed, the motion passes. Then we will ask a request be submitted up through our liaison to the city council members, to have them look at having Mr. Coker review all of the proposed changes from 2018, compare them to current Texas state regulations and laws, make sure they're in compliance, and then come back to us as what changes that were recommended should be implemented. And then we can review those at the November 19th combined workshop with the planning and zoning. Is that sufficient?
Yes, sir.
All right,
So then the next question then was, so that was for chapter 14 zoning. Chapter 4, business regulations, same question. Was that also reviewed during that period?
I believe it was. I can't remember what the outcome was, but I believe we reviewed all of them. I can't remember what the recommendations were.
Do you have any, I mean, can you, so for staff, can you just explore and
Certainly will.
see what the status is?
Yes.
Thank you.
do we need to make a motion on that one, Lisa?
No, sir, I think I can just check on that. That'll be fine.
Is there any other questions? Do we want to go through this presentation that you have?
Well, last time you had asked me to report back some information about infrastructure, and then since Mike Coker couldn't be here, I thought as related to infrastructure would be a water discussion.
Yes,
So if you're up for it, I've got just a little bit more information for you.
Yes, please.
So I know you all know what infrastructure is, but just sometimes we kind of limit our idea about infrastructure just to roads and water and sewer. But infrastructure is a lot of things. So roads, bridges, storm drains, water, sewer, utilities, even public Wi-Fi now. It's kind of, you can kind of think of that as a type of infrastructure, public buildings. And even though it seems a little bit odd, even open spaces and parks, when you think about the permanence of where you want things, you can kind of sort of think of that as like a soft infrastructure, just something, you know, just where you want to keep it permanently. So as related to that, I was asked about the current and planned infrastructure improvements. So just a little bit about how McLendon-Chisholm, how we do things here. So developers install infrastructure for their subdivisions. So they install the roads, water lines, sewer, storm drains if applicable, depending on how they're developed. The only sewer that we have, sanitary sewer that we have, is in Sonoma Verde at the moment. Most storm drains are not really storm drains, they're bar ditches in most of our neighborhoods. Sonoma Verde does have curb gutter and the traditional storm drains. Most of the subdivisions are privately owned and maintained. That was set up that way on purpose years and years ago, with the exception of Sonoma Verde, because Sonoma Verde is a PID, so a public improvement district. So it was designed that way, and that was a means of how it was, they were able to fund that infrastructure. And once that infrastructure is put in the ground and accepted by the engineer, the city takes over that infrastructure. It takes ownership of it. So for thereafter, the city maintains it. There is some funding to take care of that, at least initially. But over the course of time, it's not unreasonable to assume that because those people pay taxes as well, that at some point in time, especially as those assessments are paid off, that the city may end up having to invest some funds in that because we do own it. As for water supply, we own the water lines in Sonoma Verde because that's part of that infrastructure. But obviously we don't have a water supply ourselves. So there is a contract with RCH Water Supply to supply water to the Sonoma Verde subdivision. And as far as other water interest in McLendon-Chisholm, there are two water suppliers. RCH is the main one, and the other one is High Point. And I tried to get a map off the Public Utilities website to show you exactly where these CCNs were. But that map was so big, I just could not get it to work. So I'm just going to kind of show you in general on this map, kind of where those CCNs are. And John, you have to correct me if I get that off there. On the east side of 205 is RCH. RCH is primarily over here. And then we get north of 550 on the west side, RCH. And then pretty much everything from 550 on the west side, all the way down towards Kaufman County is under contracts. That's not bad. Just kind of players. When you get off there to the what you see our ETJ, you get into Blackman. This is Blackman water supply. If you go way off, there's Code of water supply and some other small ones. But RCH and High Point are our two main ones.
So a question that was asked last week was about the current capacity of RCH, and I guess it would also be about High Point. Do they have the capacities to be able to support us as we grow? We know that the city's looking at establishing their own potential water.
That's a good question, and I can't answer all of it fully. We've had conversations with both water supply companies. RCH, I know, has some planned improvements that they say that will answer all of their capacity concerns. High Point is, how do you want to say that?
No.
Yeah, kind of have to be careful, you know. It doesn't look like, there are a couple of developments, let me point out. Someday I will get you guys copies of development agreements or pieces of this. This property is, we just call it the main property, and this has been a development agreement for a because we have a memo of understanding doesn't mean this is actually going to happen. Hope that it works, but there's just a lot of feasibility studies that have to be done. And then timing-wise, even if it all works, even at a good pace, it might be 4 years before we can actually get it here. So I'll just kind of let John explain. He can do it better than I.
Well, and this even goes back to your initial conversation this evening about the comp plan. Comp plan is your plan for the whole community. That includes where it's going to be, what it's going to look like, all those kinds of things. And one of those would be, are you going to serve water? Are you going to continue to buy water from somebody else? Most of these water supply corporations and freshwater districts and the WICIDs, which I never know what that stands for, Water Conservation Improvement District, and even some MUDs, they existed in rural areas because rural areas didn't have any other way to have a water supply. And in most cases, if growth hits, they start to fade away because they can't compete. They're too small to be efficient. Their rates are usually higher. And if they get annexed, then usually cities like Rockwall, for example, took a lot of them over back in the 80s. And so once they're inside the city, they have the option to do that. That's not always the case. When I was in Rowlett, we had East Fork there. East Fork was a great partner for us. And so we kept them around. East Fork's still in Rowlett and a little bit of in Wiley. They've got several thousand customers. So there's no one size fits all. But again, going back to your comp plan, that's your vision deal. And so there's a lot of implementation tools that you've got in there. One of those is zoning. One of those is your entire Code of Ordinances. One of those is annexation. And one of those is water supply and wastewater service. Annexation's has really taken a hit the last 10, 12, 15 years from the state. And so it's almost impossible for cities to annex anything unless it's a voluntary annexation. So you can't really use those tools to control growth and control quality and fulfill your vision if you can't control the land by bringing them into your city. Well, one way you can do that is with your extraterritorial jurisdiction, your ETJ. You can enforce subdivision ordinances and some things within your ETJ. The ETJ for McLendon-Chisholm goes a half mile outside your city limits. And so you've got developments like the Mann property, 1,000 acres, 2,500 houses, at least on paper. You've got a very large D.R. Horton project to the east or northeast. It's like 4,000 houses or something. And you don't have any control over that. And so they can build little bitty ones, they can build great big ones, they can build horrible stuff, and it's just right outside your front door. So if you don't have the authority to annex areas, your next best thing to control is water supply. And so if, in fact, the city does decide to get into the water supply, then you've got control because the Mann property, just as an example, they're not going to develop 3,000 new houses if they don't have any water. They can't get that much well water. If they have to go with a septic system, they've got to have an acre apiece, and all of a sudden they've got 800 houses instead of 3,000 houses. Maybe that's what you want, but the point is you get to pick. You get to pick what kind of subdivision you get rather than a developer or a water district or the county or somebody else. It's your town, and you get to pick what you decide. So just one facet of that has come along, and McLendon-Chisholm and Terrell are trying to partner with each other because we're on the same side. We both care about what that 20 square miles between us and you looks like. We want it to look good. We want to be able to have some input into what it looks like. We want that to fit into our comprehensive plan, whatever comprehensive plan you come up with. We suspect it's probably going to be pretty compatible. McLendon-Chisholm is obviously a quality place. Assuming you want to stay a quality place, I've never seen a group that wanted to go, we want to start sucking. And so I'm just making assumptions here. And so in some cases, there may be water supply corporations that are great partners like East Fork was in Rowlett. There may be some that need to go away. We're working with Lawrence Water Supply Corporation. It's a small corporate water, WSC down on Highway 80 right now. Got a meeting with another gentleman and another water supply corporation tomorrow. We're taking over probably both of those, at least to some extent. And so, because we're not going to be able to grow down Highway 80 with them there, because they just can't supply that much water. And there's two reasons they can't supply enough water. They don't have enough. Lawrence buys it from us, so we could give them more water. We can sell them more water. But they don't have the lines to get there. And that's the biggest problem with that gap between us and you, is if the Mann property, it's 7-8 miles from us. And so to run a line up there is a real problem. It's a real problem not just for us, it's a real problem for High Point too, because High Point gets their water from us and from the city of Forney. So to pipe it up there is a real challenge. And they've got some customers. They've got 5 here and 2 there. Ms. Mann has High Point water. but they don't have the supply in that location, if that makes any sense. There's, two kinds of supply. Can you get it there? It's not just have it. It doesn't do any good if they got 1 million gallons every minute down 20 miles south or somewhere else. They can't get it there. They can't get it there. Right now, they can't get it there. I gather that's some of the issues Blackland's having, but I don't really know that. And I think RCH has had some of those issues, but they seem to be addressing them. So anyway, with all that said, what we're trying to do, again, is for us to partner. And so basically, interlocal agreements is another tool you have to implement your comp plan. Interlocal agreement, or in this case, an MOU, which is the predecessor to an actual agreement. And it supposes that we're going to sell water to McLendon-Chisholm at some point in the future. And we're going to basically give cash and prizes back and forth. We're going to work a deal, and this is the basis of the deal. These are our deal points. And so we're going to agree on a boundary, which is, for the most part, the county line. We're going to keep all of Terrell ISD, and you don't want Terrell ISD, because you got Rockwall ISD, which got the great reputation. And then the man property will come down south into the county. Of course, that crosses the county line, so the man property would stay there. But anyway, a boundary line will be negotiated. We tentatively agree with a boundary line, so we know where you are, where we are. We also have agreed to hire an engineer. We're in the process of doing that. We're hiring Freeze and Nichols Incorporated to do a detailed study of how much water would we need to get up here, how many people will be there. We're doing the whole estimating population densities, when those population densities will hit in a 20-year time frame. And I've done those density estimates for our area, and any day now, Lisa's going to give me some for her area. Because we need to know what the volume is, and also the volume when. And for example, the man property, again, 2,500 houses, but they're only going to build 200 at first. It's really hard. You can't send water that far. It won't work. The hydrology just doesn't work. So timing is really important too. I'm kind of meandering here, but I'm really tired because I got 4th spring. I've been at the hospital all day. Not because I was sick, but it's still exhausting. So the notion is we'll sell water to Terrell. So we've committed to hiring the engineer, which will cost us a lot of money, Lisa. And so in exchange, we're going to ask McLendon-Chisholm to proceed with that boundary agreement, so we can finalize those two pieces. Then we'll actually have a timeline. We'll say it's going to take us 2 years or 7 years to get to this location. We're going to buy this much more water from North Texas. We already met with North Texas Municipal Water District, from which we get our water. We're a customer city. There's 38 different customer cities. And so you would just become one of our additional wholesale customers. We'd sell wholesale water to you. But this study will tell us how much we need, when we need it, what size lines we need, where they need to go. So basically, we have a plan for the next 20 years of what we're going to build and where we're going to go. And yes, sir.
So that begs several questions. So would it only be servicing the areas that don't currently have water, or would this come under the city and the city would provide water to the entire city?
It could. We could choose to.
Well, there's different ways you can do that. You can take over somebody's certificate of convenience and necessity, which is called. That's basically your license to sell water in a particular piece of ground in the state of Texas, and that's awarded by the Public Utilities Commission. In the case of Lawrence, we're going to have dual certification, so we'll have the ability to serve in their current district, and then they will too. We'll keep them in business. We don't want to put them out of business yet, but someday. But don't tell them. And so you'll have to work with some of those water supply corporations. In the case of Man, if they make a demand, the individual property owners can opt out, and we think that's what probably is going to happen to High Point, neither good nor bad for us. But if they can't supply a development like Man, then she's going to opt out. She has the right to opt out and seek water where she can get it, whether she can get it from us or from you or from Blackland or RCH or dig a giant well. That's up to her to do that. And so as more and more developers come in, as more and more that growth wave hits your area, like it's coming, from the north and from the west both, then you're going to have more people who are going to opt out if they can't supply them. So basically, they get first shot. If you can't supply them, they can quit and start their own process. They even have a license to create their own districts if they need to. It's just a paper thing so far. The Ledbetter #1 water supply corporation on the Man property. Were you going to ask something?
Yeah, Lisa, how big is the Man property?
I believe it's
Acres?
1,100 acres.
So 1,100 acres, you're talking about 2,400 properties, so we're talking about pretty small lots.
I believe it's 2.5 per acre.
2.4 is the estimate, and that's the gross number. It's always, when you hear those numbers from developers, always remember that there's land that's going to be a park, or there's land that's going to be a street or a sidewalk or a pond or or wetlands?
Wetlands.
What is the proposed size of the residence?
It varies. There are different phases, different sections, just like Sonoma Verde and some of the other developments. It will vary. So I can't tell you off the top of my head. I can bring that information to you, but I can't tell you off the top of my head. I don't know.
So, I mean, back in the envelope, about half of your lots is
Oh,
getting that wrong?
smaller.
They will be smaller.
Smaller.
Wouldn't they
Yeah,
have a
the
specific-
development agreement with the Mann property and this city of McLendon-Chisholm is an old agreement that happened. And it's within about 2 years of actually expiring. And it's also, you got to keep in mind, it's also in our ETJ. It's not actually within the city limits of McLendon-Chisholm.
I mean, it's that area.
It's that gray area, yes.
Well, I mean, there's lots of gray area.
Yeah, lots of gray.
Yeah. At least I mean,
The
can
one
you
that's
point
the
out?
furthest
it's-
south. Yes.
Yeah, south mid corner.
Because the county line is
Midsection.
important there. That's an important delineation. Yeah.
So my concern is that it seems completely contrary to our comp which says that between 1.5 and 2.5 acres each. This is new. I've never heard of this before. So I'm not-
Now, we have talked to them a little bit, I don't want to get too specific because it's not on the agenda, it's not on the proposal, but we have discussed with them and the efforts to bring water on high up to the agenda, to bring water that we may kind of think that, economic agreement, they may want to, need to be looked at as well, and include mutual benefit of both parties, so. That could be, it needs to be redone at some point, because it's going to expire in 2 years, so, if they can get water from this, then we should know something within a couple of years whether or not it's going to work or not, until then. So we
When
firm
you say
that up.
that, when you say that, you need the agreement you have with the man,
Yeah.
developers of the man.
We should know whether or not we're going to, the feasibility of getting water here will work or not, from Carroll to bring water up that way. So if we can't get the water, then more than likely that development agreement will just expire in early. And they may decide that they just don't want to be in our ETJ and we can't do anything for them. As a possibility. Sugar Creek is here, this is another development that we're going to do in place that will expire in a couple of years. They don't decide that. And they're also happening. There's nothing proposed at the moment as far as, there's nothing pending, there's an old proposal in place, but developer died, and there's just not really much to do. This is also part of the review, we like to be on time, but I think,
And the Triple Creek development, is it on High Point as well? So the-
this also may go on, but you're also talking about, maybe another 1,000 times at least, maybe more.
Yeah, one thing I did want to say that if you have that density, they would have to necessarily have a sanitary sewer system, correct? Because you can't get, it wouldn't be allowed, the size of properties to have a septic system to do that, so there's a lot bigger problems. So the other question I had was about reference to the existing infrastructure that's in place right now, or how we get our water. Would the city then annex that, or how would they be able to bring in water from Terrell to be able to service existing customers that?
The Mans said that they would voluntarily annex. That would be part of a new agreement with them, if we could get them water. So they would voluntarily annex.
Yeah, I'm thinking more along the other existing subdivisions and houses that are out there today that are being serviced by whoever. There's already water supplies that run there.
Yeah, so City of McLendon-Chisholm currently owns the infrastructure in Sonoma Verde, but all the other infrastructure is either owned by the two entities, so it would have to be a sale.
You would have to negotiate something with the other water companies if we were going to take over their customers and their infrastructure.
That was the question that I had really when John was talking about. I wanted to understand how you would go about that, whether it's just a, a eminent domain type thing, or do we have to purchase them, or do
I think I'll let him answer, but I think some of it depends on how the corporations are set up. So I think RCH is, I believe, set up as a nonprofit organization. So that one should be easier to take over, or I hate to say take over, but to acquire than perhaps High Point, which may be set up a different way, and I'm not sure of exactly how they're set up. But each one would require us to, negotiate something probably very different from the other one. And yes, it probably would be an exchange of money on our side, to them. We'd have to, I'm sure we would have to buy something. They may have a loan that we would have to pay off, or could be other things, other factors. So, and I'll let you speak
Yeah,
to
just
the rest.
kind of, I guess, repeating that in a way, but there's, not to go into a lot of nuances, because there's a lot, but there's two ways you can take over part or all of a corporation or a district if you want to. And I point to district, and Blackland, and Lawrence, and RCH are all corporations, which has a little bit less authority under state law. But you can negotiate a deal, and they'll voluntarily go along with it, which is what we're doing with Lawrence. They're like, well, with 200 customers, we're not going to last very long, and so they saw us coming. Or you can just say, if you're in our city limits, we're just going to take you over, and we're going to write you a check for whatever all the accountants agree is the correct number. And that's based on the formula of your capital outlay, your expected future revenues, your debt, and all that kind of stuff. And so that might be $100,000, might be $3 million. It's $3 million by number. And so if it's outside your city limits, then it has to be voluntary. You can't do it. You can't force it outside your city limits. So you may very well have, like I was kind of talking about with Rowlett, we have successful water supply corporations. They stay in our city limits, still there, got the golf course, the water U up there in the northwest part of town, doing great. And the city's fine with that, as far as I know. I haven't worked in a while, but they're working time. And so you may very well be that. Maybe you have RCH still has half your town. But you can also operate water outside your city limits if you choose to do that. You may choose to do that because you can control future development that way. For example, what we've done with Las Lomas, which is a little over 3,000 acres south of Highway 80, is we'll give you water if you annex into the city. They're going to go slow, and so they actually voluntarily annex a 1-foot strip around the whole property. The good news for that is we know they can't go into 40, and also it moves our ETJ out, in our case, another 1.5 miles. And so if you can get like the man property, I was kind of kidding in the meeting the other day, but it would work. If the man property would just let you annex 1 foot away all the way around their property, your ETJ would jump out that much further. And so again, annexation is a challenge. It's got to be voluntary nowadays. So ETJ is more important than it ever has been. But there's, your long-term goal might be to have the whole thing, but realistically, maybe you only control 50% of the territory that's inside your city. But again, the idea is, you can make money off of water. Not always will, but it's a tool and that's why it's got to do with economic development. It's a tool to help you control your future economic development.
Does anybody else have any questions for Mr. Governor? Say again?
Yes.
Yes.
I know it's a handful of questions. Really good to know the trade-offs between cities that go about the dual certificate with the existing water supplies versus buying them out. In the case of Lawrence, what is that trade-off and why would you choose that?
Well, it came to my recommendation, so I hope it's right, but the notion was they're going to ask, we're not going to pay, but if we took over the whole thing, they're going to ask us for $700,000. And because of the growth level that we have in Carroll right now, I just didn't feel like that was a really good priority. And so the notion was we'll just take over, dual certification gives us the right to operate inside their territory. And we'll take over 1 customer or 7 customers or maybe no customers. In fact, our deal's got even more complicated. We're actually going to buy out the portion that's inside the city limits. Outside the city limits will still be theirs, and inside the city limits we'll own it. We're going to lease it back to them. So we're going to buy out that portion and lease it back to them for the same amount of money that we owe them. So nothing will happen except on paper. Basically, we'll just own it someday and don't keep operating until we don't want them to. But that's a longer answer than you need. I'm sorry. Bottom line, we just don't want to spend that much money. So we didn't have to pay. Buying them out means you got to pay for all of it. Dual certification means you don't have to pay for maybe part of it. Like RCH. RCH might be a good place for dual certification. If RCH has an area that they can't really serve very well, that might work really well for High Point. It's kind of it's a less confrontational step for one thing. If there's, if this like the man property, you don't necessarily have to put it out, take it out of their CCN, but if you have dual certification, then you can still supply water to man through us or through where you buy it. Does that make sense? So it's again, I think in y'all's case, there may be opportunities that dual certification works really well, but I don't know the area where y'all do it. But maybe not guess. That's why we're doing water. It's cheaper. It's cheaper, but you can just kind of still get your purpose done.
in a situation in which the city comes in needing to provide water versus what the traditional flows in spaces, for consumers or for homeowners, is it more price competitive for them to work with the city versus the RCH?
It's typically less expensive for the city to do it because the city's going to be denser, population-wise. They're not going to be piping water quite so far. In the case of RCH, they're already buying it from us, and when we sell it to RCH, they raise the price and sell it to another customer. So usually cities are less expensive because usually their lots are closer together, and by definition, a rural water supply corporation, their lots are, half a mile away or bigger.
And then my last question, for a pre-submittal study, for feasibility study, that also going to include the possibilities of development going on property in the residential.
Correct, and several others. We're just kind of making assumptions about when the whole area will develop. So not just those that are on paper now, but we assume this 4 square miles will, in 20 years, have this many houses on it. And in some cases, this many businesses as well. Excuse me. And so, yeah, we're trying to estimate build out forever in this whole area from you to us, basically. And it's a pretty wild guessing. But the first few years, you have a pretty good idea. And of course, every couple of 3 years, or every 5 years, like your comp plan, you update it, so you're always kind of updating it. So yeah, that's the way it's going. And then they'll give us cost, what they think it'll cost short term as well, and then we'll negotiate with property owners between the two of us, property owners, developers. Developers need to pay as much of shares you can get them to pay.
Would this water be able to review that study or that study is completed?
It's okay with us. I mean, it'll be a public document, so.
The answer is yes. When do you think the study will be completed?
It'll be sometime after Christmas. We've been negotiating scope for 2 months now. It's a fairly straightforward thing. They do a preliminary deal like in the summertime. But now we're asking for a lot more details. So just take it on.
Thank you.
After I get him some numbers.
Yeah. Well, that's not what's holding it up now. It's a big project because we're talking about what are we going to do for 20 years and how much is it going to cost. It's a pretty big project for a big company who's done it before.
Ideally, we'd want to have good relationships with both of those water companies and cooperatively decide what's best for the city and have them work with us. We don't want to do the hostile takeover kind of thing if we can avoid that. Can't we do that? I don't know yet.
But the issue with the two providers now is a lack of insight into what their long-term plan is associated with specifics. So the initial agreement with RCH, or the agreement with RCH to provide water to Sonoma Verde, have they complied completely with that agreement?
As far as providing the water, yes. They owe me some reports about maintenance. We're supposed to get some reports on maintenance, and I haven't received those. Part of that agreement is that they pay for minor repairs. I think it's up to $1,500. We pay for major repairs. My concern is that on the wastewater side, those wastewater fees, part of those fees get set aside for improvements down the road, repairs. We don't have anything coming back from water fees for water infrastructure improvements down the road.
Right.
That scares me. Although it's a new system, and I don't think we're going to have major improvements needed anytime soon, but in 20 years, or maybe sooner, you never know when you're going to have a break. The soil shifts around here, just anything could happen, but sooner or later, we will have a break or something that needs to be repaired or replaced, and currently there are no funds set aside specifically for that. We could use utility funds, which, from that wastewater, but ideally you would like to have some means of, coming from, and we don't. We don't have it coming from that water fee source because we don't have control over that.
Anybody else have any other questions? I guess just one point that I'll make just for the city, the committee members, is that this goes into our thoughts as we start looking and thinking about where we would want to have businesses, because you're going to want to make sure that we have adequate water, and then sewer is going to be another factor for us as well. So as our current layout is with the way that the businesses laid out on the economic situation along 205, that's really problematic concerning, especially just having enough water for them.
Mr. Chairman, in addition to that, though, you have more than just the need for sewers and potable water and all this other, I mean, you bring in that many houses in that small of an area, you've got a lot of kids, you're gonna require educational infrastructure for that. I think that the original water situation was designed for our current population density, and what we're doing is we're basically violating our comp plan, is what it seems to me. Is that what we're doing?
No, we were just having a discussion on water as far as when it comes in regards to the man property. That property is currently under its own development agreement. If they wanted to build tomorrow and start to break down, they can. The problem is they just don't have the water. So we don't have, the city currently doesn't have any control over amending or removing that amending or changing the man agreement without going back into a negotiation with the man property. But as it stands right now, they have a development agreement that's already in place. It's expiring in 2 years. But like I said, if nothing happens and they just decide they want to go ahead and get started, they can. The only problem that they have right now is that they can't get water to it.
So with respect,
Real quick, I just want to make sure that, so our discussions need to be maintained about economic development, so we're kind of getting off track, talking about residential areas, and then also schools and that kind of thing. Those are outside of our charter, so I just want to make sure that we don't go outside of, so we're not breaking the.
sure, I'm trying to create more of a context for the argument.
I will tie it back in just a little bit if you don't mind. The man property as related to economic development, part of that development agreement does include a little bit of commercial activity, and there is a partial annexation just for 50% of the sales tax to come back to the city. That's the current one. Now, if we get to renegotiate and they come into the city fully, then, you know, there would be additional benefits for us.
So with
But
respect,
you have to tolerate the density.
yeah, with respect to the water issue and this is my concern where it comes back to the water. Does the current infrastructure, is it designed for the 1.5 to 2.5 acre lots that we currently have under our comp plan in our city?
Current infrastructure, the water, roads,
Yeah, the water.
I mean, there's nothing there for water right now.
Nothing else.
No, I think we're, I'm sorry.
Did I misunderstand?
Yeah, I think you're talking about the man property and you're talking about a broader.
Well, I'm talking about the man property
Oh.
specifically.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Into this agreement that there is.
Yeah, there's nothing there
There's
right now.
nothing there.
So there's no water that gets out there.
Right.
It's a big well.
No, the mans themselves, they're being serviced by High Point. They're being serviced by High Point, but outside of their personal residence, that's currently on the property, there is no other water infrastructure out there.
It's right now all agricultural.
Yeah,
Yeah.
And High Point could or could not service them.
they can. The reason why the man property is searching out another water resource is because High Point currently cannot offer them the capacity that they need for that development.
They're unable to get water to them at this time and for the foreseeable future.
So just because I know, I'm not trying to split hairs, so you're talking about the development as planned or the development as under our comp plan? That's the reason why I'm asking.
High Point has the capacity to service their personal residents, but not the planned development that the current agreement has set forward.
Okay. So setting it, that's what I'm saying, so setting it back to 1.5 or 2.5 acre lot, we would remedy that.
They can't get water there at all right now.
Yeah, there's no remedy for that right now.
Any other questions?
I have a little information on wastewater if you're up for it. If not, it's up to you. I know if.
Because I think that's wastewater is definitely a requirement for any economic development.
I don't want to dismiss John, but I do want to give him the opportunity to run because I know he's had a very long day. So do you have any more water questions or MOU questions?
I'll always have water, so I'm a water scientist, so I'm always going to ask the question about water, but we just don't really ask the question, it falls around, it's what we're talking about. This is interesting, I'm not aware of this issue.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, that ultimately comes up to why we're involved, is because they don't have the capacity to take care of that kind of development. And, like I said earlier too, they
But they were told by High Point for years and years, over a decade, that they would be able to serve them. They've kind of been stringing them along, and, you know, just recently, it's kind of become very apparent that it's just not going to happen anytime soon.
What does High Point get their water from?
From us this morning,
That's what I mean.
we sold about 40% to them, and they did get a 67%. And both of us did from North Texas up to Ohio.
Any other questions, Mr. Governor? I really appreciate you
Sure thing.
coming in.
I hope I didn't talk too much. Sometimes I ramble.
No, you were very informative. I think you coming in.
We're really grateful for John. We don't pay him anything, but he's been more than gracious about his time.
Appreciate it.
Thank you, sir.
Have a blessed evening. Be safe going home.
If you're up for it, I've got a little bit of retail sanitary sewer line, if you kind of like to get up to speed on that, or
No, we'd like to understand, because I guess we need to understand, are there any plans to add any other sanitary sewer systems other than what we currently have through the Sonoma Verde that runs down 550, and what the future is?
Okay, so let me tell you where this stands. So as far as retail sanitary sewer, we don't have anything else for residential right now. There are taps available. I believe we're probably about 320 or so taps left that could be used for other subdivisions as far as sanitary sewer. Some of that, we had 400, some were given away to the school that was planned on the road here on 550. The remainder would be between the developer and the city to decide, if they were going to give those up or not, and to who they were going to give those up to.
The taps that were given to the school were owned by the developer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But they still had to have the city's permission to let those go.
They're just reserved. They're not
Yes.
provided to the school yet.
Correct.
The school district doesn't own the taps.
Correct.
Yeah, they're allocated.
They just set them aside.
First right of refusal, if you will.
Yes. And it may be that, if that school doesn't go there, then they'll come back. As far as, but there's no other, beyond those, there's no other capacity on that existing line to add any more taps. So,
And those taps could only be off of 550? There's no way to extend them anywhere else?
so 550 is a force main line. So, I'm visual, I can show you. So the way that sewer line runs, it goes down to the back, so we're here, this is 550, and it goes down to your Fourth Street, and there's an intercept line where all that water goes through, and then it's measured by the alcohol, and you can go for it. And then this goes to First Street or whatever. So that force main, you have to have a lift station to get into that, and even that's difficult sometimes. So, our engineer, that's not his preference, that we would be trying to with that, but if a school definitely, you have to access it, and you have to use the station. So any developments that they were off by 50, that's probably how we have to go, is they would have to have a lift station. If they were to go somewhere else in the city, we have to make a line, it's tied to the existing line, but they have to get it there. Run the line to where they need. As far as the retail development, last year we were approached by a developer who wants to develop on the southwest corner, right here, so across from the Sonic on our side of 550. And they have a 1.5 acre lot, they've already purchased it. They want to put in a retail strips in like that pictures. I don't want to get too much into his development either, because it's not going to do that, we want to kind of show you the layout there. So he came to us with a proposal, but because the lot is only 1.5 acres, by the time you have a building on it and concrete, you can't have septic systems. So anybody that's going to develop on that corner, really, there's not going to be room for a septic system. So, and that's true for happy to try to answer some questions on that. So what was approved on that corner so far, just so you know, is it's a planned development general business. So it was specifically approved for kind of a strip mall. This is just a concept. It's not going to look like this exactly, but a strip center and a freestanding restaurant. So that's just the concept.
Thank you. I appreciate you providing the information. What I wanted to, is everybody on the committee to be able to see where the existing sewer system is. Because I would think that as we move forward, all of the businesses that we want to tie them somehow into the sanitary sewer.
And this is actually, if you look up there, that's actually the two proposed lines. Oh, it's not over there. So the yellow, if you see the yellow, that's actually the route that it ended up being the best one. So it actually goes, instead of running right down 205, it actually goes a little bit deeper, and it kind of backs up to Chisholm Crossing. And that actually ended up being less expensive and just easier to build and less expensive. So it's a little bit further for the folks, say, at the Sonic or across on the other side of 205 to get there. They would just have to pay to run that line a little bit further.
Don't know how many people that are on the committee are aware that the Sonic does have, it's had numerous problems with their septic system, and they're not a very large business, but they do have problems with their septic system, so.
I think it was probably fine when they started it, but, the business has grown considerably, and if you look, obviously, every parking space is filled whenever you go by there. So they have had complaints from time to time. You can a city can put an ordinance in place when you do have sanitary sewer available that says that you have to tie in either within a specified time period or when your system fails. So instead of upgrading your system to work, then you can just require them to tie on. So that'd probably be something that the city would want to implement at the time that we decided to build a system. However, I think the folks at the Sonic are anxious actually to join and get started on it too. They want their business to function well.
The reason I bring this up specifically is just so that as we start talking about the comprehensive plan and then the future zoning, that think about this, what exists today and where is it that we would want to have our business development go in at. So that's the only reason I'm bringing it up, so that on our next meeting that we can discuss those things with this in the back of your mind. I appreciate you discussing that with us.
You're welcome. Again, this slide just kind of says what I just already said, that council will have to make that choice at the next meeting as to how they want to handle that. And that's just a policy decision. So even the money spent for the study, which was about $50,000, we can charge that back to developers. So we'll just add that back in. So even though the city was out some funds up front, and whether or not we pay up front to have it constructed, eventually the developers, I don't know when, but whenever they develop, will pay their share back eventually. So it's just a matter of do we want to front the funds or not.
Does anyone have any questions for Lisa concerning the sanitary sewer system?
Where's water treatment happening for this? I'm not terribly familiar with how it's all. What's the location?
Oh, I can't think off the top of my head.
You know where it is on the land?
Where's what?
Where's the water treatment?
The water treatment.
It's in Heath, isn't it?
No, it's actually south of Heath. So it runs off of 550. It ties into Rockwall, into the Rockroll Heath lines, and actually runs all the way down to the bottom of Lake Lavon, I believe is where that facility is. Oh, no, the bottom of Lake Ray Hubbard is where that facility is.
It's not on that.
That's where the North Texas is. I can't tell you exactly how. I'm not going to guess on exactly how it's all mapped.
I'm not gonna say it.
I'm not going to guess.
No, it's
I'll be happy to get that for you.
Moves up 5.
Yeah. Beyond the point where it's measured and we pay for it, I don't get involved in that. But I'm happy to find out if you'd like.
Which leads me to my second question. Where are we measuring it and then paying for it and figuring out where commercial interest versus private interest, how we charge? Where's it all being worked out?
Okay, well, it goes into, the people in Sonoma Verde pay a flat rate. They all pay the same. And it may not exactly be fair. We kind of weighed that a little bit. But the way it's kind of set up, it's a little bit difficult to do it any other way right now. But they all pay the same rate. It's just went up to, I think it's $60 a month. If we do commercial, they would have their own, they'd have a different rate. They'd probably have a commercial rate that they would have to pay. But all that wastewater will flow down 550. It hits this interceptor line, and there is a meter. And as it flows through that meter, they know where the waste is coming from. It's measured. Rockwall sends us a bill every month, and we pay that bill from the fees that we get.
You don't receive future meters to install. That's
A future what?
additional meters to install to be able to separate this.
Separate it how? I'm not sure I'm
Some
understanding.
Verdes can have their own inputs in their own effluent, so they can be separate from the ones in this development and point out to it. And the question is how much is going to be the numbers to be able to, how much is going to
It really doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Yeah, so I think there's some misconception on how all that works. So,
there is.
yeah, I think there's a lot. So the city owns the lines themselves, and each developer or builder, I guess, when those lots were built, when those lots were prepared to have a house put on them, those builders paid a fee to tap into that line that was in the ground, that the developer put in the ground. So all of that was paid right then. And then whoever's living in that house, whoever owns the house or the property, pays a monthly sewer fee every month. And then the only thing that's all they have to worry about. And then as far as where that line will continue, if the city ties into the existing one and goes down to the corner for the retail, at that point, it will just be, we pay to construct it or the developers pay to construct it, whatever is decided. But there will be tap fees, and that'll have to be determined. And then there'll be monthly fees, and we'll have to determine what those are as well. So we did a study for the residential rates, and we probably would need to do a little study for the commercial rates as well.
Thank you.
Does that help?
Yeah, that was exactly
Okay.
what I was trying to figure out, how they were going to cost. And that was a good question. Thank you.
Is there any other questions? So as I see it, this was basically item 6.2 was what we just discussed, which was discussions regarding current and planned infrastructure improvements. So as far as I see it, this concludes all of the items unless somebody else has something they would like to bring up and discuss that relates to what we've already talked about.
Did I cover most of what you were looking for as far as infrastructure?
But look into the committee to answer my questions. But
Okay.
So the only commercial development proposal the city has right now is for the property that is across, or for that development you showed us.
Yes.
That's the only one.
Yes. I mean, we get questions from time to time, but the only one that has been serious is that corner right there.
Oh, and,
1.5. That actually used to be part of the Brookshire's lot, and then they sold it off, and it has a lot of restrictions on it about what you can build on it. Well, it was divided up and sold years ago, but this particular developer, he bought it as a 1.5 acre lot. Well, it's a concept is what it is. So their idea would be that they would have between 3 and 5 businesses, and they don't know who their customers or who their tenants would be at this point. So they would own it and they would have tenants, and they don't know who those would be yet. So it just depends on what the market, I guess, is and who's looking to put a business in at the time. And because we're kind of a little bit slow with the sewer, that they just kind of are, I guess, not in a rush to be, trying to find somebody right now would be premature. The restaurant was built to be either it's meant to have sit down, but also I think there was a drive-through option as well. And there's a little patio. I think we did put that there had to be a patio place outdoor seating area on the back side of it, or somewhere there has to be. I don't know if it's specifically on the back side, but somewhere there has to be an outdoor seating area allowed.
So this revenue that we get from them, pay for their line that we provide them, is that the expectation?
But there would be a fee for it.
Well, they would have to pay their pro rata share for the line itself. So whatever the line cost, that line came in at about $316,000 was about what it is, if I remember right. We would have to determine the method of how we were going to charge, and typically you either charge by linear frontage or you charge by acreage. And we would have to decide what makes better sense for us. And then we would figure out what their individual costs would be, and I'd need an engineer to help me figure those costs. And we would charge them back for that infrastructure itself, for the lines themselves. And then there would be individual fees for those businesses.
That's you that are taking on the majority of the cost of the line, I thought, and we would donate.
Until the pro ratas pay off.
We own the line, yes, but ultimately, all the developers, whether it's upfront or over a period of time, would pay for the line. So the idea is that the city ultimately would not pay for the line, it would be paid by developers. But whether you pay for it up front, because I can't just sewer the corner, it's got to connect. So I can't just have the developer on the corner pay and get him connected. So either the city pays the in-between, to get it connected, or I somehow negotiate something with those other developers to get them to buy in now to put up their money. Developers usually aren't real friendly about letting go of their funds until they have to, so that's going to be the challenging part. So the city council will have to,
Yeah, I think
eventually the
what-
city
yeah,
will
what you're
recoup the
saying is,
costs.
yeah, the city's
I just
gonna-
can't tell you when they were going to
Yeah,
recoup
the
the
city's gonna
costs.
pay it up front, and then through fees and other structures.
That's what they'll
get
have to
reimbursed.
decide,
Yeah.
yes.
So,
That's the policy decision they'll have to make.
any other questions?
Going into business with Carol for the water, it's not just buying water from them, you're gonna be responsible for building pipes, running sewer, the delivery system of it.
They would take on most of the responsibility as for the planning. That was the way this was written, but we would have costs for our portion of the infrastructure, whatever that might end up being. We would have a take point, is what they call it, at some point. So at some point, theirs ends and ours begins. And then we pay a portion likely for a portion of storage. We may share I don't know if it would be a tower or a ground storage, but we probably won't need I don't know if we need one just for us or we would share one, but we would have to pay, whatever our portion of it is. You'll have to have some kind of storage. I don't know that's been determined what they'll need yet. It may depend on, elevations and where they need to put it. Yes, part of the study. I can't really speak to it. I'm not the engineer type, so. Yes.
Just out of curiosity, is this, just as a hypo example of development if they're going forward, is this also going, this sewer line is going to be carrying the wastewater from rain events and things like this, or is this just only solely water that's going down Florida and through sewage?
Say it one more
Are
time.
you combining surface runoff in the storm drain?
No.
Or is this exclusively sewage?
Yeah, everything that's going to go into this line is going to have to hit one of the lift stations to pump it into the pressure line that goes back to Rockwall.
Okay, so it's not going to be.
So we're not going to, yeah.
Well, this is going to reduce a lot of.
Storm drains.
When 205 is redone, it is going to be urban curved. So Textile is going to put a drainage system in for the entire length of McLendon-Chisholm.
And then,
205, where it runoff into it.
right, and they'll naturally flow through the tributaries and the creeks, and they'll follow the natural drainage ways.
It'll have to get over there, but yeah, you
But it doesn't get measured as wastewater.
surface for an acre and a half, but it's for a million years
the runoff does not get
Right off, right on.
measured as wastewater.
It's not measured. Thank you.
One quick question. I don't know if this is in the order, but for developers' plans for the strip mall in particular, has it changed since COVID?
We haven't had any contact with him other than he calls in to check status now and then. All this is the concept. So he would still have to come back. He still has to plat the property. He still has to come back with building plans and have those approved by P&Z. Even though we can't control materials, we actually put materials into that plan development. So you can do that in plan development where you can't do it in, regular zoning anymore. But we put a lot of restrictions in here that otherwise we maybe couldn't have gotten just out of regular general business zoning. So this is actually a tighter development than if we just had general business.
All right, any other questions?
And just so, I don't want to advocate for the developer, but he was real open to making it look like whatever we wanted it to look like as far as blending it in with the surrounding area. So he was real open to suggestion.
And that's definitely something we want to think about as we think about future developments, because how they're going to tie together. We don't want to hodgepodge of different things, and so we can kind of,
Kind of picking a theme or
learn an idea of how we want the city to reflect what looks good in the city and our open, and our values, that kind of thing. If there are no more questions, no more comments, I'd like to go ahead and move to item number 7. If somebody would like to make a motion.
I move we adjourn.
I have a motion to adjourn. And a second. So at this point, we are adjourned.
Well, thank you all for coming. I don't know if you missed a football game or not, but thank you for coming.
Yep. I definitely appreciate everybody's willingness to be part of this. And so it looks like that if nothing bad happens, the next meeting we will have will be November 19th.
Hopefully I won't have 2 that week.
Well, I think that we'll do, if you want to mark it up, bring it to the workshop and then we can discuss it then. Because that'll be a lot less formal, it'll be more of a workshop, and I think we can talk through it. So if you go through the comprehensive plan and you've got ideas or concerns, bring those up and be prepared to discuss them during the workshop. Yeah, thank you for bringing that up, I appreciate that. Yeah, so I'd like